Hi, this is Steve Pedrachik for Seattle Avionics. Today we're going to be talking about how to choose an ADSB system. What I'd actually like to do before we talk about picking up particular hardware is to just do a quick recap of what ADSB is. So when you go to various websites, you talk to your dealer, you talk to your installer, you talk to your friends, you know enough of the lingo and enough of what to look for to ask the questions that you need to get the system you need. So the first slide I have here is one I like to call alphabet soup. It's basically, let's be honest here, the FAA is really good at regulating flights and such, but they're really terrible at coming up with product names. They all have these funny acronyms and numbers and stuff like that. So two of the ones that you're going to hear a lot are TSB and FISB. I don't know if any of you have little kids or had little kids recently, but when I hear Tisby and Fisby, I kind of think of two cats in a Disney movie who are twins, fighting with each other, little Tisby and little Fisby. What they do mean, though, is T is for traffic, F is for flight information. So essentially, the traffic information that you get comes from the TSB feed, the B being broadcast, and the flight information, which is to say mostly weather, but it's also some other things. The FISB information you get only from the 978 portion, which brings us to the next topic. The whole concept of having some kind of surveillance system, which is what ADSB is. ADSB itself stands for, the S in it is surveillance. So the whole point is for the FAA to be able to know where you are. For a long time, for years, and in the rest of the world, not just the US, you've had this kind of system being broadcast on the 1090 frequency. The 1090 frequency is used by airliners. It's basically aircraft to aircraft, and it's very low bandwidth, so it's traffic information only. That's what it was originally designed for. When the FAA decided to mandate that folks, this was what, 5-6 years ago now, decided that people have to get ADSB, they knew that they wouldn't have enough bandwidth available on the 1090 frequency for all the GA pilots in the United States. So they opened up another frequency, which is 978. That's one that you're going to use most of the time as a GA pilot, and that's a ground-based system. The good news, as I'm sure you know, is you not only get traffic, you get weather as well. So it's really handy. A couple of other things, in versus out. Probably a better way that they could have described this would be to call ADSB in, ADSB receiver, and ADSB out, ADSB transmitter, but that's not how they worded it for some reason. And you probably know this already, but ADSB out, which is to say the transmitter, which unfortunately means the expensive part, is the one that is required for most folks. We'll talk about this in a second, in just about 6 weeks, by January 1st, 2020. The FAA doesn't care at all if you have a receiver, so it doesn't care about FAA, about ADSB in. So what's the mandate? Just do this very quickly. By January 1st, which is to say, again, about 6 weeks away, any aircraft that is flying in what is basically the Mode C veil must be equipped with ADSB out. A couple of exceptions, like if your plane simply doesn't have power and such, but ADSB out is not required. The FAA doesn't really care, like I said, if you know where the traffic is or if you want weather, but they do want to know where you are. They were using this, and they're not just doing this for fun, just to be mean. They're doing this because of the FAA's next-gen airspace. To do this, what they're trying to go for here is a laudable goal. They want to have the large aircraft that use most of our airspace being able to fly more efficiently, do it faster, use less fuel, and so on, spaced closer together. So to do that, they need to know where each and every little airplane, read general aviation, where all of those planes are. GA is not the driving force behind this. GA is simply an obstacle, essentially, that they need in implementing next-gen. So ADSB uses your GPS to, instead of using radar, the whole concept behind ADSB is it takes a signal, very, very, very accurate location signal from a certified, and I stress that, from a certified WAAS GPS, and then on your plane, and it transmits that to the ground. So you're essentially identifying your location to the FAA instead of, in the olden days, the FAAs would use radar to identify you. They reversed it around. Key point here is that you don't have to have a certified GPS if you have an experimental plane. And just to be clear, yes, you do need something installed in your plane. There is no portable GPS, even if it has WAAS, that's ever been certified by the FAA. And as I said, you do need to, as a part of the system, you do need to have your position being broadcast to the ground. So you do need a WAAS GPS. Okay, again, quick recap, two different frequencies, 1090 and 978. The blue bubble there is the 978 bubble. 978 is ground-based. There's a series of, I think, 700 or 800 transmitters throughout the country. And the concept behind that is that they're like cell phone towers, I guess you could think. The idea is if you're flying within that bubble, you're transmitting your location, if you're on 978, to the tower's then broadcasting traffic information for you. If you are outside of the bubble, which is to say outside of the transmission area for 978, like there's a mountain in the way or you're just flying in the middle of absolutely nowhere, something like that. In that case, you won't pick up any traffic or weather, because remember, from ground-based data, you get traffic and weather. You won't get any of that if you're too far away from a ground station. However, if you have a dual channel receiver, which is to say you are also getting data from the 1090, 1090 again is frequently used by airliners flying way over above us. That information contains traffic info, and with a dual channel receiver, while you won't get any data from the ground, 978, you will get the traffic information being relayed airplane to airplane in the air on 1090. So big benefit to getting a system that has dual receiver, and at this point, there's absolutely no reason not to do that. Virtually every system out there has both 1090 and 978 receivers. Clarification on the way that traffic works on this. So you've probably been, for many people, you've been flying for a long time, perhaps using an ADSB receiver, ADSB In, but without ADSB out. In that case, imagine that you are imagine that you're flying a little Cessna somewhere. Little Cessna, not the big Cessna in the middle. But the big Cessna in the middle of the Citation jet has ADSB out. What ends up happening is that plane there is transmitting it. Let's say it's actually transmitting to the ground. It's probably not, but let's assume it is. It's transmitting itself to the ground. And what happens is the FAA is then going to send up all the targets for that plane in kind of a broadcast mode so anyone can listen to it. But the traffic targets that the ground station relays back up in the air are the ones that are specific to all of the planes in the system that have ADSB out. And they do that by defining a particular radius. Basically, wherever the transmitting aircraft is, it will be told about any other traffic that's within a 15 nautical mile radius of its position and plus or minus 3,500 feet vertically of its position. So if you have a plane that's outside of that, you won't know anything about it. So for example, if you don't have ADSB out, okay, but you do have ADSB in, you can listen to the transmission, which is being broadcast for the Citation jet in the middle. And in that case, let's say that you're the red Cessna at the bottom of the screen with a red circle. So my receiver may be powerful enough to see the traffic being broadcast for the Citation. So I will see the two other red Cessnas in that blue kind of pie slice. Problem is, I won't see these three Cessnas that are a lot closer to me. And the reason why I don't see those is because, quite simply, the airplanes there, the three aircraft with the red circles around them, are not that close to the Citation. Therefore, the ground station sees no need to transmit that data to it. Another way of looking at this is, this is a screenshot from FlyQ EFB. So if you are flying along and you are the aircraft that's towards the left-hand side near Plantation Pine Airport, the blue aircraft, notice that there's a white circle around you. Remember that in FlyQ EFB, we typically put a 15 nautical mile ring around your plane. 15 nautical miles. See, that's the same system that the FAA uses to tell you that traffic is close. In other words, it's the same as this one. 15 nautical mile ring here and 15 nautical mile ring around your plane in FlyQ. So you're flying along and you do have ADSB in, but you have not yet put in ADSB out. You see two traffic targets, one which is plus 37, which in FlyQ means plus means above. So that plane is 3,700 feet above us. The little tick mark next to it that's pointing up means it's climbing. A little further to the right, you have negative 0.5. So that plane is below you by 500 feet, but it is also climbing. So you may think, well, that's great. I have 2 traffic targets, neither one's a factor, yippee skippy. So only 2 planes in the area, right? Well, no. The problem is that if you don't have ADSB out, you really have no idea. The only reason why you're seeing those 2 targets, the 37 and a 5, the only reason why you see those is there's another aircraft somewhere in the area which has ADSB out. So those 2 planes are targets for the other plane. And by the way, one of them could be the 37 itself or the 5. One of those may have ADSB out as well. You don't really know. The point is you don't really know that if you don't have ADSB out yourself, there could be numerous other planes in the area, and you simply wouldn't be alerted of them because they are not traffic targets relevant to the aircraft that does have ADSB out. Okay. So the moral of the story here basically is if you don't have ADSB out, you can't make any sense out of the traffic that you see on your receiver. It's nice to know you absolutely will see traffic where the receiver says you have traffic. However, that's probably not the only traffic that you see. Okay. So in other words, get ADSB out. It's not just a good idea. It's not just the law. It's a good idea. Okay, so let's talk about ADSB out. ADSB out is an interesting technology in that ADSB out is just a transmitter. So in theory, the stuff may be arguably not that expensive, but it is. You can go, there are a number of different systems on the screen. These are not all of the ADSB out systems you can get, but let's just cover a few of them. Starting in the upper left corner, you have the Garmin, I believe that's 345. You have, in the blue one is a Free Flight Systems Ranger. You have the Stratus ES or ESG. Next to that, the one with the blue letters. They're squawking 1200. You have a Garmin, I believe it's the GDL 82 below there, which has the separate GPS versus the silver box. You have an L3 Lynx to the right-hand side of the price tag. Below the GDL 82 is something that has a big red light on it. That is a UAvionics sky beacon. And then the one on the right side is a UAvionics tail beacon. Fundamentally, these things all accomplish the same thing. They take the location that they get either from a GPS that's built into them or from a GPS that you already have in your system that you link to it, and it is transmitting your location to the ground. Or to the air. That's pretty much it. The issue, however, of course, is that these things cost anywhere between about $1,800 up to as high as $8,000, depending on exact configurations. And for most of these units anyway, you then have to get them installed. So for example, if you were to get the Garmin 345, 345 in the upper right corner, I believe begins at about $2,200, but that assumes that that's ADSB out only. You have to add ADSB in also if you want it. If you need to hook it up to a GPS, I believe that's an additional charge, and so on. A lot of these units are like that you have to really look at the fine print to know exactly what you're getting. Many of them have many of these ADSB in units do have an optional configuration that includes, many of these ADSB out units have an optional module that gives them ADSB in also, which sounds like a really great idea, right? Because you don't have to have a separate box. Other of these units, though, do not have that and are just ADSB out. For example, the UAvionics systems down the bottom are ADSB out only units. They're just transmitters. They do make something called the Echo, which I believe is also ADSB in, but I just didn't show that here. The 2 UAvionics systems at the bottom are by far the cheapest here. One is, I think, $1,850, and the other is about $1,950. What's interesting, though, about that, more than anything else, honestly, is the installation. So when you look at the Garmin units or at the Free Flight unit or at the Stratus ESG unit, it's pretty clear that all these units need to be wired into your panel. To do that, you have to have, unless you happen to be certified yourself, all of those units have to be put in by an A&P mechanic. The problem with that, of course, is that those folks are probably really busy right now trying to help all the other folks who are putting in ADSB now, not to mention Thanksgiving and Christmas. So the problem is that if you're wanting to get something so you can fly beginning on January 1st, you may have an issue getting something installed in time. which is kind of the beauty of the two UA avionics systems. They've been selling really well. Just to be fair, Seattle Avionics is a reseller for those UA avionics units. So I guess maybe you could argue there's a little bit of bias here. But the reason why we resell them is pretty simple. They're really popular because they're super easy to install. They claim something like 10 or 15 minutes to install these. Maybe if you're really super handy. For me, it might take half an hour or an hour or two. But in both cases, the way that the UA avionics systems works, you are essentially removing a light that's already on your plane and replacing it with this, which is a light, but then also in that same casing unit has a WASP GPS, and it has the ADSB transmitter in it. Very clever design. Okay, so the price tag that you get here, begins around $2,000. You can get a number of these systems strictly ADSB out for the $2,000 to $3,000 range, let's say, but then there's installation to worry about. One thing I would point out here is that the units like the Garmin 345 and the Stratus and some of these other units, you may or may not want to get the option to get ADSB in also. If you already have an ADSB receiver, and by that I mean something like this. If you have a Stratus 3 or one of the new Astrolinks or the Dynon DRX or any kind of a Stratix, including our Merlin, any of these kind of ADSB units that are ADSB in, any of them, if you have an ADSB out system that broadcasts from here, what that does is, assuming it's on 978, it will trigger the ground station to send data back up. And that data can be received by anything that's listening to it. It doesn't have to be the same box. So all of these boxes here, the ADSB in boxes, will receive weather and traffic from the ground exactly as well as if you were to, on an ADSB out system, install the optional module for receiving ADSB in. So, I mean, it may simplify your panel configuration a little bit, but if you already have, for example, a Stratus 3 or one of these things, you really don't have any particular reason to have ADSB in built into the box that you put into your plane. And in many cases, it significantly increases the price. I'm going to flip back to the out one. I believe in the 345, it's something like about $2,200 for ADSB out, and then about another $2,000 or $3,000 for ADSB in, which to me didn't really make a whole lot of sense. On the other hand, the Stratus units are pretty good. I don't remember the price, but you can configure the Stratus units with essentially a customized or slightly modified version, I guess, of the Stratus 3. They call it the 3i. So basically, when you get the Stratus unit, you can get the Stratus ESG either with just the ADSB out system, or you can get the Stratus 3i to go along with it, or if you already have an ADSB, you're good to go. So there's a lot of reasons here why you may not want to bother buying, spending the additional money to have the ADSB in built into one of these units. One other thing too to keep in mind is that if you do get ADSB built into one of these, whether it's the Garmin or something like that, in every case that I can think of, they don't include an AHRS in the package. So you will get from the system, from an ADSB in perspective, you will get the weather, you will get the weather and the traffic and the GPS, but I don't believe that any of them, except for the Stratus ES, because it comes with a Stratus 3, basically. None of those systems will transmit AHRS. So if you want to have backup AHRS in your plane, you actually probably don't want to get a unit that tries to be all-in-one. Rather, just get ADSB out, like, for example, with either the low-price Garmin unit, low-price Stratus unit with an L3, or with one of the UA avionics things, and pair that with an inexpensive ADSB in receiver. If you don't have one already, it's relatively easy to figure out which one you want here. For example, with FlyQ EFB, FlyQ works with just about every ADSB receiver on the market, except you'll notice that there aren't any here that have the word Garmin in their name. Garmin uses Bluetooth, not Wi-Fi. The only other company that does that is Dual. And the way that Apple happens to work, Apple, when you hook up a Bluetooth receiver to an iPad, in order for an application like FlyQ to see that data at all, to even know that the Bluetooth connection is there, the manufacturer of the hardware has to specifically enable by writing something to Apple saying this blah, blah, blah application is allowed to see the data. If you are not allowed to see the data, The iPad doesn't even tell us that it's available. We can't look at it. We can't do anything with it. So dual is, of course, very, very good. If you have, say, a dual 170 unit, FlyQ will connect to that just fine. We'll pick up all the ADSB data, the GPS data, and so on. But if you have a Garmin system, which also uses Bluetooth, we can't even see the data. As opposed to every other unit on that page uses Wi-Fi, and they all use standard open protocols. One thing to be careful of, which means FlyQ will use it. One thing to be careful of, though, is that the Stratus units were originally designed just to work with ForeFlight for a lot of basically business and marketing reasons, not technical. And in keeping a Stratus 1, which is probably kind of hard to find these days, it's a single channel older unit, but the Stratus 2 and the Stratus 2S are very commonly found. That's actually, I think, a picture of a Stratus 2, I'm not sure. Those units don't work with FlyQ because they were specifically designed only to talk to ForeFlight. Very technically speaking, they'll talk to FlyQ for 10 minutes. Then unless ForeFlight talks to them and says, please continue, it'll stop transmitting most of the data. If you have a Stratus 3, however, the unit that came out, 18 months, 2 years ago, if you have a Stratus 3 or the 3i product that goes along with the Stratus ESG system from Aperio, that works just great with FlyQ and with ForeFlight and with WingX and most other systems. So almost all of these units here, everything from like that, a Merlin or another Stratus or a Dynon, whatever that is, those tend to work very, very well with almost everything. Let me give you a more specific sense of the pricing here. So at the high end of the market is a Stratus 3, and by high end, it's not really that high. It's $699. That includes a WASP GPS, that includes a dual channel ADSB receiver, and it includes an AHRS. All of those systems work really well. We've had extraordinarily good luck with all the units that we do sell those too, I should mention. We've had really good luck with all of those units, and customers report really great luck using it routinely. A newer unit next to that is the AstroLink made by Level. That's $100 less expensive. That's a $600 unit. A great unit made by a great company. They're built in Florida by a family-owned company. The Stratus, by the way, is also built in the United States. Next to that is another US product. That is the Dynon DRX. The Dynon DRX is less expensive. I don't remember if it's $350 or $325, but it's in kind of that range. The difference, though, between the Dynon and the AstroLink and the Stratus 3 is that while it does include the WASP GPS and it does include a dual channel ADSB receiver, it does not include an AHRS. That may be one of the ways that they kept the price on that down. So it's quite a bit less expensive. And I guess you could argue that's comparable to what you would get for maybe $2,000 as an add-on if you added that to your in-panel device from Garmin to an ADSB out system. So if you were to get like a Garmin ADSB in and out, the price differential between out only and in and out is a lot of money. And you can save quite a bit of money by getting the super reliable Dynon DRX, for example. Also, it works great. You can pick up a Stratex rather unit, which are the kind of kit-built units. They're also sold by a number of companies. We used to sell them as well. We branded them as our Merlin. Those products are on the order of $200 to $300, and they include dual. They can be configured however you like, but most of them are sold with dual channel receivers, with a WASP GPS, and with an AHRS. Next to that, the one that's black is a dual, I'm not sure if that's a 170 or a 180, or 190 rather, but that's a dual ADSB receiver. Like most of the rest of them, it includes the 190 at least, does have an AHRS, a dual channel ADSB receiver, and a GPS. And then, like I said, if you already have more or less any receiver, it'll work great with it. So some of the older units down below, one of the units that came out really early on that was, for its time, fantastically good, was a cube-looking one. That's a Clarity. The folks who make that Level AstroLink have been making ADSB units for a long time too. So that's a screenshot of one of their older eye-level, they used to call them eye-level units. So basically, if you already have an ADSB receiver that works, there's really no compelling reason to spend the extra money to get an ADSB out system with internal ADSB in. other than it does clean up your cockpit a little bit. I mean, that's always nice. One fewer thing sitting on the dash, but at quite a steep price. Also, again, I want to just really emphasize this. I'm going to go back. That if you were to get a Garmin unit, the Garmin ADSB systems are great ADSB systems. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They work really well, but they will not talk to most other systems. So FlyQ, unfortunately, is prohibited by Garmin, basically. Garmin will not give us the secret code, as it were, to be able to talk to their units. So if you do get a Garmin system, the ADSB out part will work just fine because ADSB out does not need to talk to your iPad. ADSB out is a transponder. I mean, that's basically all it is. It's a transmitter. It gives location information to the ground or to other aircraft in the area. It does not send, it doesn't receive anything. It doesn't know about weather. It doesn't know about traffic, and it has no real need to talk to your iPad. So if you just wanted to get just ADSB out, the Garmin stuff is totally fine. If you want to use ADSB in, an ADSB in system made by Garmin simply will not work with FlyQ or with a large number of other applications on either iOS or on Android. So this is a really short presentation, to be perfectly honest with you. That's most of it. The other part, though, that I want to talk about is panel systems. So the other way that you can get ADSB in your system is if you already have a glass panel or you're thinking about one, FlyQ supports a number of them already. Starting at the upper left-hand corner is the Avidyne IFD that comes in a couple of different sizes. The one to the left, to the right rather of that, is a Dynon Skyview. The one below the Avidyne is the Bendix King XView Touch. And then the final one there is the Advanced Flight System new 5600 box. All of these are great glass panel displays. The reason why I'm bringing that up is another way that you can get ADSB working with your iPad is this. Let's say that you, well, let me actually back up a little bit. Basically, what you end up doing is you get either a certified, in most cases, or a non-certified ADSB system that hooks into and is made for specifically hooking into whatever panel system you have. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it basically means you take one of those boxes, like one of these, and you hook them into, you hardwire the input into your Dynon, into your Avidyne, into whatever you have over here, okay? And the way that you do that, there's two different ways to do it. Here's the way that, I'm gonna show you a way that works with FlyQ and a way that doesn't work with FlyQ. So on the yes side, this is how to do it. You begin with something like, this is just an example, like a free flight system Ranger, and you connect that with wiring. You can see lots of cable connections on the free flight system. You wire that, hardwire it to, in this case, your Avidyne IFD. And then that creates a Wi-Fi broadcast, which connects to FlyQ. Okay, so basically the ADSB signal goes through the Avidyne. The Avidyne's Wi-Fi then includes all of the positional information and the AHRS information that the Avidyne is broadcasting. And it also tacks on all of the ADSB data it gets from the free flight systems, sends it to FlyQ as one package, and you're good to go. You'll get traffic and weather and all that good stuff, and be able to transfer flight plans, by the way, too, with it, with the Avidyne. The way not to do it that doesn't work with FlyQ, although it's something that we may be able to get to work in the future, is this. If you begin with an Avidyne IFD and then you take its Wi-Fi signal and you tell it to connect to a Stratus or Stratus or Stratex, any kind of ADSB receiver, and then the ADSB receiver transmits the data to FlyQ, FlyQ will get confused. Specifically because it will see two different sources of position. It'll get position information from, in this case, the Avidyne, and position information broadcast from the internal GPS on the Stratus or Stratex or whatever you have. So essentially you get two different position signals, and that will drive FlyQ crazy. So the way to hook this up properly is if you have an in-panel system, get an in-panel certified, generally ADSB system, plug it into your glass panel, and then let the glass panel handle it from there. Don't try to use an ADSB receiver as a hotspot, basically, to transmit to FlyQ. Actually, I do see a question, so let me see if I can do that. Any discussion on how ADSB data is displayed in FlyQ? Well, yeah, we displayed a little bit of that there in one of the other slides, although I'll tell you what, I will show you how it's displayed by looking at something in FlyQ itself. So I'm going to go to the company. I don't have an ADSB data feed running right now that I can show you, but I can show you. Oh, by the way, too, if you want to know which products work with FlyQ, you can go to seattleavionics.com/supported-adsb.aspx, or more generally, if you go to our homepage, just go to seattleavionics.com, tap anywhere on FlyQ, and then if you scroll down a little bit, there's a link on here, roughly, hopefully you can see my cursor here. It talks about supports more than 20 different ADSB systems. Click on that, and we tell you which in-panel systems we use and how, and then which ADSB systems we support. It also, by the way, tells you there is a way, kind of what I just described, that if you do have a Garmin GTX 345, you can get ADSB from into FlyQ. The way to do it, of course, is to add an additional ADSB receiver, like a Merlin or a Stratix or a Stratus or whatever else. So, so let me show you what FlyQ will look like for displaying data. So I'm going to go back to my products, go to FlyQ. And let's take a look at traffic information in FlyQ. I'm going to show you a small picture first, which is here. This is a rather complex image, but basically the way that we display traffic is pretty slick in that we will display information on the 2D map and you can filter it out if it's too far away and so on. I'll tell you what, I'm actually going to go to the top of the screen here, and I'm going to open up the pilot's guide. Just a link here, this is download the pilot's guide. And we're going to jump to the spot that talks about ADSB traffic in FlyQ. So it turns out that the pilot's guide is hyperlinked. So when you go to the table of contents and you go to the section about ADSB, I'm going to click on the line that says traffic in FlyQ EFB. And that shows you a good way of how that's displayed. So let's talk about that. So in FlyQ EFB, this is actually a slightly older image, interestingly. So imagine that you're flying along, you've got the blue plane there, that's you. FlyQ uses color-coded information to give you a sense about how much of a threat or not of a threat a particular aircraft is. So in FlyQ, we often use red to mean bad. So in this case, you're the blue plane in the middle, and you clearly have a target, which is in bright red there, which is at -0.4. Negative means it's below you. A plus means it's above you, and 0.4 means 400 feet. So that aircraft right there is just 400 feet below you, but next to the 4 is an arrow pointing up. That means it is rising. In other words, that is a really big problem because that aircraft is going to be at our altitude soon. Also, I should point out that there's a line in front of that red aircraft. That line is where, at the current speed, that aircraft is going to be in 2 minutes. So you can clearly see that that 2-minute line cuts straight across our flight plan course. So that's why it's red, because that's definitely a factor. The one that's orange behind the aircraft is probably not going to be a factor, especially because it's behind us. But you never know. So it's orange, just giving you a warning. And all of the other objects on here, all of the other aircraft are almost intentionally hard to see. They're kind of a light gray and black and that kind of thing because they really are no factor. The other thing I want to point out about FlyQ, I think it's on the next screen here, is the traffic filter. So there are two screenshots here. One, we have a concept in the product called the traffic filter. There's that ring that you can see around the aircraft. It's the white ring. The white ring, as we mentioned before, is 50 nautical miles away from you, from your current position. So you can definitely argue that when you take a look at all the traffic that's on the screen on the left-hand side, there's a lot of traffic, right? And if you're just looking out for traffic that may be a threat, there's just too much clutter on the screen. So at the very top of that ring is a status indicator that says 15 nautical mile traffic filter : off. Guess what? That's not just giving you information. If you tap on that, you toggle the traffic filter on and off. So now it's off. And then on the right-hand side of the screen is what that traffic looks like when it's cleaned up by turning the filter on. So again, how did it clean it up? Well, remember that it does it in two different ways. We use the very same definition that the FAA does for traffic threat, which means plus or minus 15 nautical miles, 15 nautical mile radius, or 3,500 feet above you or below you. So when you turn on the traffic filter, you immediately get rid of any aircraft that is beyond the ring, but you also get rid of any aircraft that's within the ring, but either too low or too high to be a factor. That is above 3,500 feet or below 3,500 feet. So that's, I think, a really good way to look at it. I think there's another screenshot here too. Yeah, here we go. So this is from a little bit newer version of FlyQ, where we put in the ability to take a look at the tail numbers of the aircraft. When we first came out with ADSB and FlyQ, there frankly just was kind of no point to displaying tail numbers because no GA aircraft had ADSB out. You only see the tail number of an aircraft if that aircraft is transmitting its tail number to the ground. And airlines did it. So, if you want to know where United Airlines or American Airlines was flying, that's lovely. But if you want to track other GA planes, it was kind of irrelevant because only a very small percentage of GA aircraft had ADSB out until quite recently. But quite recently is the key here, because now a good percentage of the GA fleet does have ADSB out. Therefore, about a year ago or so, we put in the ability to show the tail number of the plane. Now, something I do want to point out here, though, is if you look at that screen, before in the screenshots that were here, we had traffic targets that were black, that were orange, and red. Those are strictly threat levels. If you take a look at the one from the little bit newer version of the product, you see a new color. You see a light blue, and there's a reason for that. We added a feature at the same time, which is probably described here. It is described here, but I'll just describe it for you. It's something called the buddy list. What FlyQ allows you to do is a couple of things. One, you can filter out your tail number. So if you have ADSB out and you don't want to see a shadow of yourself because, let me back that up. If you don't have ADSB out and you're relying on seeing a traffic target being broadcast for another plane, if there's another plane in the area and you're near that plane, if that plane has ADSB out, the ground station will transmit you as a target to that other plane, which makes sense. But then if you're listening to it and you don't have ADSB out yourself, what you see is all the targets in the area for that aircraft, and guess what? You're one of them. So the FAA will be broadcasting you in your position back. You're looking at it, and since it's usually a couple seconds behind you, and there's also an issue to do with pressure altitude versus GPS altitude, you end up seeing essentially a shadow of yourself. So it looks like there's some other aircraft that's a few hundred feet away from you. Kind of annoying, actually. So what you do is you can, if you have ADSB out, which is to say you're broadcasting your tail number into the sky, what you do is you type in settings, it's something called tail number to ignore. You type your N number into there and FlyQ will filter that out automatically. The other feature though, the one that is why there's those blue aircraft, the blue aircraft are your friends. You went into FlyQ settings and you typed in the tail number manually of those aircraft. Therefore, what FlyQ does is pretty slick, I think. Let's say that you fly with people a lot, you're flying in formation, you're flying as part of maybe a CAP group, Civil Air Patrol group, or you just have some friends and you want to see where they're flying. The blue makes them stand out a lot, so you immediately know where your friends are. Also, it works in conjunction with the ADSB traffic filter that I described a few minutes ago, where even if you turn on the traffic filter and your friends are in the area, but outside of that 15-mile ring, we'll still display it because we figure if your friends are in the area, even if they're a little bit too far to be a factor in terms of collision, you probably want to know about that. So anybody that's on your ADSB, what we call buddy list, will be blue. And if it's in the sky anywhere near you, you will see it on your FlyQ display. So hopefully that answers the question in an extremely long-winded way. Does anyone else have any questions at all? Love to try to answer them for you. One other thing that's down here. There's a system right here that when you tap on a particular target, you can see more information about the target. So in this case, I tapped on a particular aircraft. The aircraft I tapped on on the underlying map display, we turn bright green so you know which one you tap on. And when you do that, you get all the details for that aircraft. You get all the things like its flight ID, the ICAO number, which is to say its hex code. You get its tail number if available, speed, altitude, distance away from you, rate of closure, either towards you or away from you, and when it was last updated and so on. So if you ever want to see more details, you can see that. Additionally, when you tap on that plane, it also shows you all the other ADSB targets in the area, which is to say, we tapped on a plane which is identified as DAL 1820, but above that are 3 colored balls, a green one, a blue one, and a yellow one, and an aircraft icon. The aircraft icon in that case is U. And the colored balls, the green, the blue, and the yellow one, are the other ADSB targets in the vicinity of where you tapped. And you can see the relative altitude to you, so you immediately know that they are substantially far above you. So we essentially give you a 3-dimensional view by tapping on a 2-dimensional map. So just a little bit of other information there. Let's see. And we have a question here from Dan. How often is Merlin software updated? Has been updated in the past year, such that I should figure out how to update it. We don't make the Merlin. We purchased Merlin from the folks who make it. There's a guy named Chris Young who came up with the concept of the software for doing it. Very, very, very smart guy. You can go to, if you take a look at your Merlin, there's a manual with it. The manual has a website that you need to go to so that you can check to see if there's an update. To be absolutely honest, I'm not sure if the software for the Stratix has been updated since then. I don't know. Sorry, someone else just walked in. Do you happen to know?
No, I don't. But okay. Somebody was also asking about what is AHRS and why do we think it's important?
Oh, okay. So basically the Merlin, I would go to the Stratix website, which I think is stratix.me if memory serves, but you should look at the document there. And someone apparently also asked about AHRS. Why is AHRS important? I did not mention that, so apologies. AHRS is Attitude Heading Reference System, which is to say gyros. So for whatever reason, historically, a number of the ADSB systems, when they came out, started to include electronic gyros, essentially. So you can get yaw, pitch, and roll on the plane. Very, very handy if you're doing 3D synthetic vision, not particularly relevant otherwise. You can also use it though as a backup in case some of your primary flight systems fail and you want to be able to get attitude, heading, and pitch on there. So having AHRS as a backup is definitely a nice thing to have. Whether it's core functionality that you need in your ADSB receiver, it kind of doesn't necessarily have anything to do with ADSB. It's more just a matter of packaging in that your iPad or your iPhone can only connect to one Wi-Fi device at a time. So if you had multiple devices, like a standalone AHRS and a standalone GPS and a standalone ADSB receiver, your iPad couldn't talk to all 3 at once. It would only be able to talk to one. Consequently, the manufacturers just started building all the hardware devices into one box, and then that one box gets transmitted. Pretty clever, actually. Let's see. Does Sky Sensor provide AHRS data to FlyQ EFB? I do not know what a Sky Sensor is. So you may have me on that one. Do you know the manufacturer? This is for you, Benjamin. Do you happen to know who the manufacturer is of the Sky Sensor? If Avionics is, I think, what I heard. I don't know. Does anyone else happen to know the answer to that? If not, I can try Googling it. So I will do that. All right, so let's take a look at the Avionics Sky Sensor. It says ADSB In, GPS, Wi-Fi. It does not mention AHRS. So if I had to guess, I would say no. Traffic, weather, features. To be perfectly honest, I think they'd have an awful lot of trouble putting an AHRS in this thing because it's got to be a lot of vibrations when it's hanging out there on the wing. So It looks like no, and I think it would be really hard for them to do it and do it in a way that's reliable. So does not look like it has AHRS. Anyone else have any other questions? Thank you, Benjamin. I see you're telling me it's Avionics. I didn't see that originally. All right. Well, I think at this point, I'd like to thank everyone who attended the presentation today. I learned something, which is always nice to do, and I enjoyed speaking to you about ADSB.